So after a very long break, nearly 2 years, there's a lot of work that goes into videos like this, and I think I do it to myself because evidence that we have currently, just I want to present them accurately. I don't want to be misleading anyone, so I want to make sure the time that I spend researching is well spent. I understand well what I am presenting. So yeah, these things take time and they are difficult to produce, but I enjoy doing them, so we're back. This time we're going to do another two-part series. This one is going to be about, oh actually, I lie, it's going to be a three-part series. The pre-flood world, civilizations washed away. The Great Flood unleashed, Earth's transformation. And a new Earth, the world reborn after the Great Flood. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to really unpack heaps and heaps, tons and tons of stuff. It's going to be good fun. We're going to do a really big deep dive today into what Earth would have looked like pre-flood, before obviously everyone and everything, every living creature was washed away. That is, except everything and everyone on board the Ark, Noah's Ark. If you want to know a bit more about Noah's Ark and what I think is the best theory for where Noah's Ark resides today, then I do have a video on that, so have a look and I'd love to hear what you think. There are over 200 accounts of the global flood. So where is this boat that could withstand the strength of a global flood? But anyway, that aside, we're going to look at today, like I've already said, what did Earth look like before the flood? Obviously the flood was a catastrophic disaster, ended civilizations as we knew it. Obviously this was a very long time ago, and a lot has changed since then. But you're probably just as curious as I am to know, what did Earth really look like before the Great Flood? There are obviously a lot of different theories on this, but there are some prevailing theories. And one of them is Pangaea. You probably would have heard about it. This sort of mass continent, this idea that all the continents that we currently know were once joined. And although it seems like a very far-fetched idea, and that how is it possible that these giant continents that are just so big and enormous to really fathom them moving, it is possible that that did happen, and that many thousands of years ago, these continents were once joined together to form a megacontinent, Pangaea. Like I said, it's a pretty crazy idea that all the continents were one. But when you have a look at the world today, you do sit and wonder that maybe it is possible. When you have a look on Google Maps, or whatever, you might have your flat map out or your globe, but you have a good look, you can see some of the continents really look like they were joined. They could have been joined at one point. And there's a lot of theories behind how that would have happened. And something that I find particularly interesting is the hydroplate theory. This idea that many thousands of years ago, during the flood, actually the flood being a result of this continental movement. I have a video on this, so go and watch that. They're a two-part series on, not just one video. So do go check it out to understand better where these flood waters came from, where they are today, and how that all happened. But hydroplate theory, that's the one thing you should remember today. Again, the hydroplate theory is something that was devised through some help with others, but mostly Dr. Walter Brown. This was a theory he came up with and brilliantly presented with multiple animations, giving a real sense of what this may have looked like. Again, it's just a global scale, so it's really hard to fathom, but I think it does a good job. So check out that video. Actually, we'll show it now. We'll have a look at that now.
According to Dr. Brown's theory, the ancient world that Noah lived in was very different from the Earth we occupy today.
Noah and other pre-flood people probably lived on one very large supercontinent with lush vegetation, inland seas, and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, perhaps 6,000 feet high. Before the flood, about half the Earth's water was in interconnected chambers about 10 miles below the Earth's surface. This formed a thin spherical shell, almost a mile thick. The pressure in the subterranean chamber had been increasing for centuries because the gravity of the sun and moon produced tides in the subterranean water that lifted and lowered the Earth's massive crust twice a day. This tidal pumping added gigantic amounts of energy to the subterranean water. This increasing pressure in the subterranean water steadily stretched the crust as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began as a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at almost 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched claw. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. The Bible even gives us a precise date, the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. Then it says, and the rain fell. The fountains of water jetted supersonically into and above the atmosphere. The spray from these enormous fountains produced torrential rain such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The supersonic fountains eroded the crumbling rock on both sides of the widening crack. This produced huge volumes of sediments that settled through the floodwaters, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the crack became so wide that the newly exposed floor of the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, with lubricating water still beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, and like a runaway crashing train, they compressed, crushed, buckled, and thickened, rising out of the floodwaters. This is why the major mountains are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. Today's major mountains were all pushed up in hours. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the mid-Atlantic ridge, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated.
Anyway, so as you can see, on a global scale, things were it was just crazy. There was no chance that any living creature or person would survive that. I mean, look at it, it was crazy. The whole world changed its shape, really. This was a complete reset of humanity. All civilizations up until that point were gone, wiped away. This actually brings up an interesting idea that you look at a lot of the sites around today, and ancient sites I'm talking about. We won't go too deep into this, but there is this floating idea that there are numerous lost technologies. I'm not talking about computers and hardware, that sort of thing, but lost technologies, ideas and understandings of our world and the cosmos that we actually, back then, I'm talking about likely pre-flood, had a very good understanding, if not a fantastic understanding of what the cosmos, our Earth, understanding of life and death. We're actually very smart people. But because of the flood and ultimately sin causing us to be wiped away and civilizations to be reset, all that knowledge, that valuable knowledge, was lost. So you do have hundreds and thousands of sites that are just really unexplained. The fact is, it is very likely that these were created pre-flood. This knowledge is pre-flood and lost today. So not only did Earth look very different, the landscape completely changed, but also our understanding of the world was somewhat reset. Now, this is something that I have mentioned before, but pre-flood, where was all the water? All that water that now is sitting in our oceans, essentially formed our oceans. Where did it all come from? But this is something I touched on before, so I will share that clip now. It's very interesting, so you do want to watch that.
It is believed by Christians that the earth today is very different to what it was before the flood. A lot of water from the Great Flood is now sitting in our oceans. 71% of Earth's surface is water. But where did the other 29% come from to cover even the tallest mountains in Genesis 7 verse 19? It is possible that the fountains of the great deep described in Genesis 7:11 could be water from within Earth's mantle exploding out. Scientists have long been speculating the existence of H2O deep within the Earth. Researchers Brandon and Steve were the first to provide evidence for this. Using vast amounts of seismic data from the US array, They were able to find proof that there may be substantial amounts of H2O trapped between the upper and lower mantles in a layer called the transition zone. The water isn't found in its form like we all know it. However, it is found in its fourth form trapped within ringwoodite. The fourth form of water is called tunneling. Water is changed into the state when put under extreme pressure, forcing itself into tiny spaces. Scientists have found ringwoodite from this transition zone with water in its tunneling form. This research is still ongoing. However, at this stage, it is estimated that if just 1% of the weight of mantle rock located in the transition zone is H2O, that would be equivalent to nearly 3 times the amount of water in our oceans.
So now that we have a good theory and a possible understanding of where the waters were pre-flood, and we know, okay, well, Earth was obviously very different, but what about in the sky? Now that's very interesting that you asked that. Well, thank you. Above the Earth, the Bible describes there being water above and below. Now obviously we just talked about the water below, that was the subterranean water, but water above, okay, well, we didn't have clouds, rain clouds, because the Bible does tell us in Genesis that the water would come up from the ground as a mist. So obviously we didn't have rain falling, but it was always tropical environment. So there is a prevailing theory that there was a water vapor sitting above in our atmosphere that was protecting us from the UV rays. It makes a whole lot of sense when you think about the hydroplate theory, because if you have enormous jets of water being shot up into the sky, the water reaching so high up into our atmosphere would start to cool really quickly, rapidly decreasing the temperature on our Earth. And that explains why we had the last huge ice age. We'll get into that in another video because that is during the flood and post-flood. But it's interesting because it would have changed our seasons. Obviously we didn't have rain. Basically we're sitting in a big glass house because of this water vapor, which I don't entirely know why it would be there, but when the Bible says something is there, trust me, it is there. So anyway, we do have the water vapor sitting up there, creating this sort of glass house effect on Earth, which explains why it would have been such a tropical, warm, and with having the mist coming out of the ground, it would have been a great place. Like if you think about the Bible describing the Garden of Eden, absolutely perfect, beautiful place, probably spanning all of Pangaea if we're going back to what I was talking about earlier. So yes, I mean, Earth was completely different back then, very, very different, and a beautiful place. Not that it isn't a beautiful place now, but we're constantly facing natural disasters and asteroid impacts, and it's a rough place right now. Earth is very dangerous to us. But back then, when the Garden of Eden was created, God had created the perfect Earth, a very warm, safe environment for humans. Obviously, with the fall of man, things took a very steep turn for the worst. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. It's a very interesting topic. There's a lot to unpack, and we've really just scraped the surface. But I'm going to end it there because I want you to do a bit of your own research. I can sit here and tell you everything that I think, the things that I've researched, and my understanding, but what your understanding is ultimately what matters. So I urge you to go and do your own research. But remember, we're going to have part 2 coming out, The Great Flood, Earth's Transformation. Now this is going to be a very interesting one. There's going to be so much more to unpack because it really, really was a terrible, terrible time. Not only for everyone who died and every creature that perished, but also for Noah and his family. You can imagine it would have been very, very traumatic. And for civilization itself, basically a huge reset for us. We had to start from the ground up again. So keep an eye out for that one. It'll be coming very shortly.